AJ Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrep both are flashing new pitches at spring training. Who needed a new pitch more? Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Wednesday, February 19th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And you can find all my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. Best ways to support the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That also, by the way, gets you the video of Brian Snitker, Alex Anthopoulos when they meet with the media, and the videos are available. I post them to the YouTube channel. There's a playlist just for that. Also, subscribing to the newsletter, free or paid. That's where we go into a lot of our deep dives that maybe wouldn't make a great podcast, introduce new tools like the Prospect Composite that we put out a couple weeks ago, and that's where we end up funding a lot of our reporting trips, whether we're heading to spring training, winter meetings, games, things like that. And I want to empty the notebook here on a Wednesday. A lot of smaller stories, nothing that could be an entire show, but just updates from Northport from spring training. And the first one is some new pitches being added by some Braves top prospects, right? Credit for this story goes to Justin Toscano, the AJC, friend of the program, came on last week, writing about Hurston Waldrep bringing his curveball back and AJ Smith-Shawver adding a cutter. So some really interesting changes. Let's get to Waldrep first. This is something I've addressed before, but like one of the things that the Braves do in their farm system is take a prospect, a pitcher, and strip away pitches, right? When they first get him in the organization, the idea is we're going to temporarily shelve one or more of your pitches to get you to focus on a specific thing that we want you to get better at. And typically, the way that works is Atlanta scraps a curveball to focus on a slider, right? AJ Smith-Shawver did that. He spent a full season not throwing a ton of curveballs, focusing on his slider. And then after reintroducing the curveball, then they spent another season focusing on using the changeup a lot more, to the point where it's probably his best pitch at this point is AJ Smith-Shawver's changeup. So Hurston Waldrep has thrown a curveball in the past, but he is back with it this spring. And the comments, the quotes from Justin Toscano, really good stuff here. I'm going to read some of these quotes. If you want to read this full story, ajc.com. Justin did a great job on this. But here's the quote from Hurston Waldrep about getting rid of the curveball and then bringing it back. Quote, so the focus when we got rid of it was to work on the slider, to work on making the slider kind of the forefront of the arsenal and let it make the splitter better, really. There's more. I'm going to read more quotes here, but I want to explain what he's talking about here. So the idea, this is an arsenal interaction thing, right? I've explained before, for Hurston Waldrep, everything is based off of the splitter. The splitter is his money pitch. That is his biggest strike and miss, swing and miss pitch. That is what he's going to get punch outs on. And ultimately, his fate as a major league pitcher will rest on that splitter. But we've also talked before on previous episodes about the difficulty he has locating his fastball. And the splitter is notoriously hard to locate because the spin is so low. You really can't reliably land the splitter at any given place. Any of the big splitter guys, Kevin Gausman, Yamamoto, any of those guys can't reliably put the splitter where they want to put it. So you have to be able to throw strikes with other pitches so that hitters are thinking this will be a strike. So that's the goal here of the slider. Obviously, you want swing and miss and things like that, but being able to reliably throw the slider in the zone makes, one, a swing and miss weapon there because it does have break on it, but also it gives you another pitch to set up the splitter. And then the curveball Bringing the curveball back, that's more of a situational thing. The quote from Waldrep here. So adding the curveball back just gives me a little better tool to lefties. It fits my fastball really well out of my arm slot, and it just makes sense to bring it back. This is something where most pitchers, and this is becoming a bigger thing in baseball, but a lot of pitchers will platoon their pitches. We mentioned this yesterday with Buck Farmer about how he had a tendency to throw his sinker to one-handedness and his four-seamer to the other. Similar thing here. You'll see a lot of lefties will throw changeups to right-handed hitters because it's something that's going to move out of their bat path, right? The Waldrep's curveball, if I remember my time watching it while he was at Florida, it's not a straight 12-6 breaking pitch. It does have two-plane movement. And so because of that, it's a situation where when he faces a lefty as a right-handed pitcher, that pitch is going to break in towards them. So it's going to be useful in a situation where he can throw it off of the plate and let it come back and steal a strike. He can throw it over the plate and it's going to end up inside on them. It's a situational pitch. And he decided it's going to be really useful in those situations. So that's what he's talking about. And the work he's done on it, it does apparently look different. Again, I have not seen it yet, but it does apparently look different. He talked about in the offseason, the work he did on it was to get the shape, the velocity, the movement profile. And he's trying to figure out how to use it. And there's a great quote here that Justin got from him. How are we going to use it? What the percentage going to be? What counts are we going to use it in? It's not going to be just, hey, I'm going to abuse this pitch. It's going to be use it here and there, get ahead of counts, keep hitters off balance. Hurston Waldrep's bread is always going to be buttered off that splitter. That is going to be his pitch. Fastball, splitter, slider, but having a curveball and knowing when to mix it in gives him just another weapon in an arsenal to get hitters out. And the players with which he was watching film of to try to understand the best usage of it demonstrates that. Garrett Cole, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. All guys that when you think of them, you don't think of curveball dominant guys. They have a curveball. They don't use a ton of it. If he had said, yeah, I watched Charlie Morton, Blake Snell, and Max Fried, I'd be a little bit more worried because that would signal an overuse of the curveball. But in this situation, those guys, that's a great sample of pitchers who don't overuse that curveball. It's clearly their third or fourth option, but they understand when to bring it out. I wouldn't expect that curveball to get more than 10% usage, and that's probably even high, based off of these comments and the pitchers that he was watching to figure out how to use it. But I love stuff like this. I love hearing that young pitchers are adding new pitches and figuring things out. This pitcher Schwellenbach debuted a sinker last year in the majors. So love these things. AJ Smith-Shawver, by comparison, has added a cutter. So this is a really interesting development because he has become so, not dependent, but his changeup has gotten so good. Four seam, changeup, slider, curveball. And his slider's gone through a lot of iterations. The Braves really messed with that slider a lot, trying to figure out, so should it be a sweeper shape? Should it be a gyro slider, which kind of spins like a bullet or a football does? It doesn't have a lot of lateral movement each way, but it has some kind of drop to it. So the Braves really messed around with it enough that when he came up and he pitched that start against the Cubs, I want to say I don't even think he threw a slider. It was all fastball, changeup, curveball. But adding a cutter in here gives him another firm, hard pitch, which is a comment that he explicitly made to Justin Toscano. Just try to mix in another hard pitch. Gave him another pitch with velocity since he's become, again, not reliant, but because that changeup has become so effective and such a good weapon for him, having another pitch that is harder than a breaking pitch kind of helps reinforce that velocity difference between the fastball and the changeup. Throw in a four-seam fastball. He threw it at 94.5 last year. He threw the changeup at 86. So you're looking at an 8-mile-an-hour difference. And really, the platonic ideal's around 10. Cutters, for the most part, usually are a mile-an-hour or two off of a four-seam fastball. His four-seam fastball velocity, I believe, is ticked up a little bit. So the cutter's going to probably come in around 8 mile an hour harder than the changeup, and the four-seamer would be around 10, which is where you want it to be. And that slider is going to click over to that 85 mile an hour threshold, where it's really hard for any gyro slider of 85 miles an hour or harder to be a bad gyro slider, right? But kind of the tease that I gave on this was who needed a new pitch more. And when you look at these two guys and look at what they added, right? Hurston, Waldrep, again, driven off of that splitter. I pulled Stuff Plus for the majors for 2024. So caveat on this, Waldrep threw 7 innings. AJ Smith-Shawver threw 4 1/3. So very small sample sizes. We talked about this in the newsletter this morning. These sample sizes are not enough to completely stabilize yet. But Hurston Waldrep's best pitch in the majors last year, like his splitter, came out to a 125 Stuff Plus, which is absurdly great, okay? AJ Smith-Shawver's best pitch of that changeup came out to a 137, which kind of blows my mind because changeups feel like they're usually undervalued by Stuff Plus models. But also, everything's based off your primary fastball, and Hurston Waldrep's fastball isn't as good as AJ Smith-Shawver, so everything's a little bit off there. I feel like the usage, like what he's talking about for the usage, I like the curveball for Hurston Waldrep more than the cutter for AJ Smith-Shawver, but I think both of them are good ideas. If you asked me what pitch should this guy add, curveball would have been one of my first two answers for Hurston Waldrep. I would have asked about something on his fastball. Do you maybe move him to a two-seamer sinker or to a cutter because of the kind of pedestrian life that four-seamer gets? That's a different show. For AJ Smith-Shawver, I would have said something hard, right? I would have said I probably would have said a cutter because I feel like he gets enough natural kind of horizontal movement on the fastball already. So I love both of these additions. I'm really excited to see how these guys sequence stuff. One of my biggest regrets about this spring is that the Braves will play in so few StatCast-enabled parks to get all of the really interesting info and data on these pitches. Cool Today Field in Northport is not a StatCast park. And we're only going to get it when they go on the road, and we're only going to get it for some of the ballparks they go to on the road. We also won't have StatCast data for the spring breakout game. The Braves are hosting the Tigers, and we're not going to get, for all of the prospects that are in there, Drake Baldwin may be in there, we don't know. We're not going to get StatCast data on any of those guys. It's honestly a travesty. It's really disappointing. But by the way, if you want to know what the spring breakout roster should look like for the Braves, if they want to win, we wrote about this a week or two ago on the Substack. Again, bravestoday.com. I believe the article is called Designing the Ideal Spring Breakout Roster, so go check that out. In just a minute, let's talk about the rotation and Chris Sale. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby talking about emptying the notebook here from spring training. And one of the bits of news we got on Tuesday from manager Brian Snitker in his press conference, and again, that full video, we have a playlist of Braves press conferences available on the YouTube channel, so go check that out. One of the bits of news that we got is that Chris Sale is starting the spring training opener on Saturday on the road in Fort Myers versus the Twins. He faced hitters on Monday. Nick Allen actually took him deep. Don't be worried about that. That's something, especially very early in spring, these guys are looking to get to certain pitch counts. They're just trying to make sure they feel good and things like that. So, funny story on that, actually. Last year in spring, when I was down in Northport, and Justin jokingly made fun of me for this after it was done. Like, not in about. He also reassured me, made me feel good. But we were talking to Chris Sale after one of his outings, and I want to say he went 4 innings. He struck out 4. I think he allowed 1 or 2 hits, no runs. And it was like his 3rd start of the spring, right? And I asked him, I said, do you feel good about, what are you happier about? Are you happier about the results from this outing? Or is the whole goal here just to come out of it healthy, happy with your results, happy with your velocities, and how you feel after the start? And I was trying to figure out, like, how do you feel? And what are you looking at and thinking about as you're preparing for spring? That's the question I was trying to get. But that's not the way I asked it. And that's not the way that he, and not rudely, but jokingly, he was like, I don't want to be bad. I'm a competitor. I don't want to be bad. I want to get strikeouts. I want to get guys out. I don't want to give up runs. So yeah, it's important that I did well out there. And he was busting my balls a little bit. He acknowledged that ultimately it doesn't matter, right? The game doesn't matter. The results don't matter. He has to make sure he's ready for the season. But he just jokingly had a little bit of ribbing for me on the kind of the way that I asked. Yes, I care. I don't want to give up 3 home runs out here. Like, I don't want to give up a bunch of tanks. I want to do well. So I just thought that was interesting about Chris Sale. But he is starting the spring training opener on Saturday. And so the kind of belief, the assumption here is that Chris Sale is going to end up being the opening day starter for Atlanta. And if you think about it, this really makes sense. This is the way the Braves telegraphed this, because last year, the first guy who pitched in spring was Spencer Strider. Spencer Strider ended up starting the season opener on Friday at Philly. Again, one of 2 starts that he made before he was shut down for the whole year. The year before that, it was Max Fried. Same thing. Max Fried took the first start in spring, ended up being the opening day starter. It makes sense that Chris Sale was one of the first ones to face live hitters. Chris Sale gets the first start in spring. It's very likely, although obviously not confirmed, that Chris Sale will get the opening day start. Some teams have already announced their opening day starter. Shota Imanaga is starting for the Cubs when they go to Japan in the series against the Dodgers. A lot of teams haven't announced them. If I remember right from last year, Atlanta didn't announce that until we got, I want to say, a week and a half or so out from the season opener. And we already assumed, just based on where guys lined up, that Spencer Strider was going to be the guy. But he was the guy. And so it made me go back and look. Obviously, 3rd straight season that you'll have a new opening day starter. The last time you went 3 years with 3 different opening day starters was 2019, 2020, 2021. You had Julio Teheran in 2019, who is still in the league. He pitched last year for the Mets. You had Michael, at the time Mike, now Michael Soroka in 2020. And then you had Max Fried in 2021. And then another little fun fact here. There are 2 Braves pitchers that started 6 consecutive opening days. Believe it or not, Maddox never did it. Glavine never did it. Smoltz never did it. There were 2 pitchers in Braves history who started 6 consecutive opening days. If you're watching on YouTube and you have an idea of who it might be, leave your comments down below. First one to get it right will pin the comment and give you a shout out on the show. Curious to see who you think of here. Also made me kind of wonder, who would you pick as opening day starter in 2026? Is it Chris Sale? Is it Spencer Strider? I'm really curious who the Braves are going to have. Is it going to be 4 different opening days, or, the different opening day starter for 4 consecutive years? I'm curious about that. In just a minute, let's talk about some really weird trade proposals that came up and why none of them make sense. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Now that baseball is getting back, it is time to get back into Underdog Fantasy. Links in the episode description. Promo code BRAVES. New customers get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Really fun how this works. You build a lineup of players. For their projections, you pick higher or lower on their performance, depending on how many guys you pick. And if you pick the one that is less or more likely to happen, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. It's available just about all of Braves country. Hate it for you, Mississippi. But Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, all of that. We've got Braves fans all over. I've heard from you guys in Virginia. I've heard from you guys in California. If you think you might be the Braves fan who lives the farthest away, we heard from one who lives in Central America. Let us know. Leave a comment on YouTube while you're down below. But again, links in the episode description for Underdog Fantasy. Promo code BRAVES. New customers get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash with your first deposit. Final segment of Braves today here on Wednesday the 19th. Emptying the notebook. And I think the big one here is suggested trades. I got an email from a sports book. They're not sponsoring us. Maybe they should. I'm not going to say their name, because one, they're not paying for it. But there was a really interesting the email was odd, right? It was trade odds of Vlad Guerrero Jr. being moved. If you haven't paid attention to that news, one, we talked about it over on First Pitch. That's our daily MLB recap show, firstpitchpodcast.com. Go check that out. But Vlad Guerrero gave the Blue Jays a deadline of Tuesday to either agree to the extension or that he would file for free agency at the end of the year. And they did not hit the deadline. So he has said, full squad workouts on Tuesday. I'm not discussing that. They're going to have to compete with 29 other teams in free agency. The odds, the next team odds. Number one, the Boston Red Sox, 3-1. Really a weird fit here because they have too many guys already. Rafi Devers, who should not be playing third base, he's terrible, doesn't want to move to first for Alex Bregman, so they might throw Bregman at second. But they've got Tristan Casas at first base already. They already have a first baseman, right? 3-1 odds to get Vlad Guerrero. 4-1 odds to get Vlad Guerrero, the Atlanta Braves. And I really don't understand why the Braves are rumored to get Vlad Guerrero Jr. I asked people on Twitter, why would you do this? Why would the Braves make this trade? The only scenario that I can see that, one, I'm assuming this is the connection with Alex Anthopoulos, right? The only way that I can see this making sense, the Braves having a place to play Vlad Guerrero Jr., is some sort of injury that keeps them out for the rest of the season to Matt Olson, to Austin Riley, or to Marcell Ozuna. And if it's Ozuna, I feel like the Braves could probably rotate the DH spot through Ronald Acuna. Drake Baldwin could get called up. You could rotate guys. I feel like there's options there. But Austin Riley, Matt Olson, one of those two guys goes down. There is not a starting caliber backup for either of those guys in the organization. You have bench guys who can fill in for a day. Luke Williams can cover for a weekend if Austin Riley tweaks an ankle. Luke Williams is not a long-term plan at third base. Vlad Guerrero's played third base. He currently plays first base. So if Matt Olson goes down, again, you don't even have, I don't think Chadwick Tromp has ever played first. Travis d'Arnaud had at least played some first base. And then obviously Marcell Ozuna has been working at first base, has played it in spring, has never played it for real. I could see a scenario where you could see how, okay, you get a guy who's really good at first base, but he's also going to be a free agent after the year. So we don't have to worry about figuring that out the next season. At the same time, if they do decide to move Vlad Guerrero, he's going to be probably the best hitter available via trade, and the cost to get him is going to be high. And I just don't see Atlanta meeting that cost in free agents, in the trade market, right? So it didn't make a ton of sense to me. Another trade that's been discussed that people have suggested, and I want to say Bleacher Report's to blame here on this, but Xander Bogaerts, the shortstop for the Padres, to Atlanta. Zach Reimer argued that. I want to say he did that on like Monday. Very weird suggestion. It's a salary dump, right? They signed him to a massive contract, 11 years, $280 million. It's got 9 seasons left. They moved him to second base after 1 year of that deal, and now he's moved back to shortstop simply because Ha-Seong Kim left in free agency. And apparently, former MLB GM Jim Bowden of The Athletic said that the Padres are willing to include a top prospect if they could get somebody to take the contract of Xander Bogaerts. Okay, he's 32 this season. It really just, still, even with the ability to get a top prospect, it doesn't make a ton of sense, right? This is something where he's owed $25.4 million every year through 2033, his age 40 season. You look at the Padres' top prospects, and maybe it was different if Jackson Merrill was still a prospect, and you could have plugged him in at shortstop. But just the Padres' top prospects is it's either incredibly young or a catcher in Ethan Silas, who actually is both. He's both a catcher and incredibly young. And it doesn't dovetail nicely for Atlanta. Nobody in Atlanta's organization is making more than $22 million a year. So Xander Bogaerts would be that guy. Nobody is signed through their age 40 season. Xander Bogaerts would be that guy. And the argument there by Reimer was that Bogaerts would be an upgrade on Orlando Arcia. And yes, he would. He hit 264 last year. He also only slugged 381. How much of an upgrade? Oh, I'm sorry. The OPS is 688. That was what Xander Bogaerts did last year. Orlando Arcia hit 625. That was his OPS last year. So, is it worth taking on $225 million remaining over 8 years for Xander Bogaerts if he hits with an OPS in the sixes, when you're paying Orlando Arcia $2 million to have an OPS in the sixes? And again, the defense, I feel like, is honestly, Arcia is probably a better defender than Bogaerts is at this point in his career. Doesn't make a lot of sense. It really it doesn't make sense. I saw one about J.P. Crawford of the Mariners. The Mariners have no reason to trade J.P. Crawford. There was a question, we might dive into this in a different show. There was a question, now that Geraldo Perdomo has signed an extension with the Diamondbacks, what happens to top shortstop prospect Jordan Lawler? I personally think he's going to play to be the third baseman. Eugenio Suarez's deal is up after this season, but there could be an argument for some sort of deal that nets Jordan Lawler and Jordan Montgomery. I do feel like if you make that deal, though, Drake Baldwin's going to have to be in that deal, plus probably a couple arms. If you're in essence buying a top prospect in Jordan Lawler, again, most teams don't trade top prospects who are in AAA, especially shortstops, unless they're getting major leaguers or major league ready guys. I honestly think that conversation starts with Drake Baldwin, one of AJ Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrep, and another top 10 pitching prospect at the minimum, if not more. Decide for yourself whether that's a deal that you're okay making to get Jordan Lawler, understanding that whatever you're thinking is probably too low to get one of the top shortstop prospects in baseball, although coming off of an injury-ridden year, and so with a little bit of a less polish than he had in the past. This has been Braves Today for Wednesday, February 19th. You're listening on audio. Do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop the next episode. Maybe also leave us a 5-star review with some positive words. That'd be really cool. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.